Well, welcome to Coming Up Higher. This is Alicia
And Whitney.
and we are excited today to have a new friend, a new special guest, Ron Rawls. And
Yes.
just a little bit about Ron. He has the ability to bring both cultural and musical diversity into his work. He's a Grammy Award winning producer, musician, exemplifies what it means to be a driven artist and musician, working as a touring musician for the last several years. He is currently a music director for gospel and Christian recording artist Mandisa. She's awesome.
Love her.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And he earned both a Grammy Award and a GMA Dove Award in 2014 for his work on her 2013 studio album Overcomer.
Wow.
And he just has released some new music. And what was the one you released this past year?
Shine on You.
Yeah, I
like
love
that
that. Cool island feel to it.
Yes.
It's really cool. And music just runs through his DNA, and we're just really excited to just hear your story, hear your heart, and what you feel like God is doing today.
Yeah.
And but we want to welcome Ron to the
Welcome.
podcast.
Thank you. Honored to be here to hang out with you guys. You were talking about Shine on You. I love the beach. So as you see, you probably
Yes.
can't really tell, but that's a picture of the beach behind me.
That's cool.
Oh my gosh.
I know
Yeah.
that song, I felt like I was transported. I loved it.
Yeah.
That was the plan. I love that.
Yeah, I know.
Everyone was kind of stuck in their homes throughout the pandemic. And so the beach is one of my favorite places. So literally, you saying you felt transported.
Yeah.
That was our prayer.
Oh my
Good.
gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I know, because I went on a cruise with my mom in 2019 and we went to like all these different islands and that's what it reminded me of. I'm like, man, I want to be
Yes.
on a cruise.
Awesome.
I love that about
I love
music
it.
though, because it can just transport you to different emotions or places or feelings, and so that's super
Yeah.
cool. You captured that with that song.
Yeah.
So
Amen. I
Well,
love hearing that.
we were talking before the podcast. We're like, we know each other, but we don't really know each other.
Mhm.
And so we're
Yeah.
excited. Alicia and I are going to be learning a lot more about you as well as our listeners as we
Yeah.
talk. But we just want to jump right into the conversation. And you have, I don't know, you have quite the bio. Like, I love hearing all the things. Like, and I know you're like super humble and probably hate me saying this, but like seriously, God's done some amazing things through you. And not just because like Grammy Award winning and like all these things, but like your heart and just what is, and that's like so reflected in your music. And we prayed before the podcast and I was like, God, just thank you for his yes. And it's just so clear that you've just given God a yes with your life and your talents and your giftings. So let's just dive down to like your musical roots and your testimony. Tell us how all this has begun.
Yeah, so I grew up Huntsville, Alabama. I don't know if you've heard of the Shoals. I don't have deep connections to the Shoals other than through friends, but I didn't realize that there was such a musical history already connected to literally where I was growing up. But grew up in the church. My parents, my dad, he's a musician. His dad was a preacher, and his whole family was just full of musicians. So any Christmas or Thanksgiving or any family function, you'd always find us wrapped around a drum set or keyboards, just literally all that stuff. It was always happening, people singing. And so that was literally my upbringing in the middle of, church, just a literal church environment. And then moving from there around the age of 12 is when I really committed my heart to Christ, I would say. Obviously, it was, a process and still is a growth process, but that's where it started. We had a pretty good youth group at our church. And I'll back up a bit. It was all the gospel choir stuff. So, Hezekiah Walker and Donnie McClurkin, Israel Holden, all the gospel stuff that we love. So that was my literal roots. Every week I'm on the organ. There's another guy on the drums. And we're just, going for it every service. So that was my upbringing until about 16. And around then, well, I'd say from 16 prior, we had a pretty good youth group at our church. And around that time, I'm not really sure why, but things just changed. And my home church, the youth group started to dwindle down a little bit. People growing up and moving on, and so I had friends at my high school, and they invited me to their church. And so I feel like the kind of like the weaving pattern that I've been seeing throughout my life is God providing in random ways. So maybe I'm serving here at my home church, but then he's allowing me at the age of 16 to go to my friend's church and be able to grow. And so it's kind of keeping that balance of serving in music and then also continuing to grow my relationship. So I was at that church, well, both of those churches, from age of 16 to about 21, there in Huntsville. And that was when musically I was exposed to the Christian contemporary and modern worship sound. So that's really where the gumbo started to happen, where it was kind of
marinating.
Yeah. Mixing between what I grew up on and this newer sound for me. And I haven't looked back. I mean, it cultivated a heart for diverse worship music and just pulling from different places. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah,
good.
I love that. Well, first of all, when you were talking about like all the family get-togethers where you're always singing around a piano, I'm like, man, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because we come from a very musical family as well. So it's like we can't even like get together without somebody being like, all right, we need to sing this song.
Yes.
Sometimes like as a kid or even now, we're like, do we really have to? But
I love that.
Well, mainly when it's in public and they're like, sing this Christmas carol, and all this stuff.
Looking up the lyrics really quickly.
Exactly.
No one asked us to sing, but we're going to do it. You're going to get a concert if our family's around. So.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
But I also love too what you mentioned, and you didn't specifically say this, but with like bridging the gap and with your musical heritage, you grew up listening and playing to one kind of music, but then as you got exposed to another. I just love this idea of just bridging the two together. And so you're able to reach both people. Sometimes I think in music and even in the Christian world, it's like either you sing hymns or you sing contemporary or you sing Christian rock or like whatever. But I just love when God like melds them together and bridges a gap. And I think even just with the successes you've seen with music, like I think other people believe that too, or other people enjoy that too.
Yeah. I love it too. It makes it hard to market, obviously, if that's what you're shooting for. But something my pastor, we attend, I'm kind of in that season again where I'm serving somewhere and attending somewhere else. So we attend Legacy Nashville, Pastor Lyle Phillips, and he's always talking to me about being yourself and being true to what God's put in the inside of you. And that is great and also tough at times because it's not, I mean, I think there's like a hunger for music that's diverse or however you want to label it. But it is hard to market it. Just, there aren't huge streams to push it through. But we've just done our best to, put it out, and we're having a blast and people are being blessed through it. And that's honestly, I feel called to just infuse people with hope and encouragement. And if I can do that through my music, then there we go.
Yeah. And you do that. And I think it's so, I think that's such a big struggle as artists, especially, when you want to reach the people and you want to have that broad audience or things like that. And, but yet still be authentic to yourself. And I think that authenticity, when it comes first and foremost, that all that other is going to be added, because when we're being who God created us to be creating what he wanted us to create, he calls anybody in the Bible, they were forerunners. And when you're a forerunner, or when you're a pioneer in whatever it may be in your sphere, however big or however small, to those listening, sometimes there's some debris you got to cut through. You got to take that machete and you got
Wow.
to tear down old mindsets, and you got to tear down old constructs or old religion or religious thinking or whatever it may be in your situation. And
That's good.
sometimes you're like, man, am I ever going to get to the fun part? Am I ever going
Yes.
to get to that smooth sailing or living my
Yeah.
dream, because right now it feels like I'm in the trenches, but
Yeah.
I think that's such an important part that you brought up is sometimes when you do step out and you're being authentically who God created you to be or where you feel like he's calling you, sometimes the masses aren't going to get it right at the beginning, but that's what
Yeah.
forerunners do, is they prepare the way for that new sound or
Yeah.
the new thing that God wants to bring in.
Amen. That's good.
Yeah. So what, kind of piggybacking off that, like what has that process looked like for you as far as um, being able to like create authentically, but having the pressures of, well, I need it to sound like this to be played on radio, or there's a
Yeah.
structure or formula.
Yeah.
What has that process looked like for you just to stay authentic to what you feel like God's called you to create?
Yeah. Well, I don't feel like I've done it perfectly.
Well, none of us, of course.
Yeah.
We're
I
learning.
think, yeah. I think I feel like it's been a journey. Early on, the music that probably no one has heard, I was definitely working to try to create it to make it a certain way. And, maybe it turns out cool at times or whatever. But I've learned that it doesn't work if you're not being authentic. And so a lot of that music no one's heard, thank the Lord.
Yeah.
Just, and I still have some of those songs, but um it's really just been a development process, and I'm still in it of figuring out, okay, lyrically what connects. And I was standing backstage one day, and I felt just the presence of God just speaking, and he's like, your only goal, at least in the grand scheme of things, is just to help people engage in my presence. And if you're doing that, you're doing your job. And
That's
so
good.
for me personally, I've tried to keep that as a part of what I'm doing. Yes, there are moments where we branch out gospelly and it's a lot of fun, but I try to still keep that theme of, can people still engage in what we're doing?
Yeah.
Because that's my heart, is to be transparent. I
Mhm.
feel like music that is transparent, you can easily jump in and you're, swimming in the presence of God, so to
Yes.
speak. So
That's
I
good.
love that picture. I
yeah.
love that. As you were talking, there was a question that popped in my head and I lost it. I lost it as I was
You're
swimming.
good.
I just love
You're
hearing
good.
I love hearing the process behind what you were thinking. Even like, yeah, there was this one point I was going for a certain sound, that radio sound or whatever, which that's cool. And
Yeah.
then it kind of grew into this, and I still go back to my roots in gospel, and I do this, and that's the God we serve. He's a creative God, and
Yeah.
so often we want to confine him into, it's got to look like this, it's got to sound like this, but
Yeah.
that's not, he's in it all because he created it all, and
Absolutely.
he made us in his image. And so
Yeah.
the creativity we have inside and the giftings, they're all from him,
Amen.
and so I love that. But I kind of wanted to go on the process of too, you go from this church kid playing in the youth group bands and all of this stuff, and then how did it go from that to Grammy award winning Mandisa band director? Like, give us a couple of
Yeah.
those destiny points or those god moments that led you to that.
Well, it connects to my heart for serving the local church.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I was serving my church here in Nashville. I don't know what year that was. It was, I guess, in 2004. And Nicole C. Mullen, her music director, moved to our church, and he was the band director at our church. And at some point, he's like, hey, man, I think you would be a good fit for this date that we're headed to, if you're interested. And I calling it a date. It was a travel date, music date. And he said the artist name is Nicole C. Mullen. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay.
I
And
think I've
so,
heard of her
Let me
before.
check my
right.
calendar. I think
Oh,
I'm free.
yeah. So I was a nervous wreck first rehearsal, but it worked out, and I was able to travel and play for her. She gave me my first touring opportunity, and
Wow.
it came through serving at my church. So
That's
I tell a
awesome.
lot of musicians, if they're really wanting to get an opportunity, stay faithful where you are. Obviously it helps to be at certain locations to, fast track that maybe, but I think at the end of the day, God is the one who is opening doors. And
Mm.
so being faithful where you are is a big deal. And so,
Yeah, I love
um,
that. Just the whole aspect of I was serving when when this
Mhm.
door opened up. And
I was,
I know sometimes like we'll get asked to do things and people are like, how did you book that? Or how did you get that event? And it's like, well, we were just praying. And as we prayed about it, or, as we just kept doing what God put in front of us, like the door just opened.
Mhm.
yeah,
And that's what I love is just having all these God stories, as our story. We don't ever want it to be about, well, we did this or we achieved that, but
We
it's just
followed a
like,
formula.
yeah, following
yeah.
just man's structure and man's formula. We want it to be like, nah, listen to what God did. Like only
He
God could
totally,
have done this.
absolutely. I honestly, when I moved to Nashville, and I know this sounds crazy, but I didn't know that Nashville was Nashville.
Oh,
Oh
wow.
my
I
gosh.
just I just moved here to study music production at the school MTSU in Murfreesboro. Um, that was my goal. I just wanted to produce music for the people I was connected to,
Mm.
and that just grew from being at the church to eventually playing with Nicole, and then that through playing for her, it just opened up other doors to play for other artists.
Mhm.
Eventually, we came across Mandisa. She was coming off of American Idol, and she needed a band for a few concerts. And Nicole's team, she had started doing some solo dates with Women of Faith, so that kind of created an opportunity for us to play for other artists. And that's really when we transitioned to play for Mandisa, and I've been with her now for a little over 12 years.
So
Wow.
cool. I
Yeah,
And then just as you were speaking, just like the story of David just came to mind of
yeah,
what was he doing? He was just doing his job in the field, and he didn't know that day when he was going out to, you know, be around some smelly sheep and, stepping
yeah,
in stuff and just out there worshiping by himself and being the
yeah.
outcast. He didn't know that day he was going to be anointed to be the future king. He was serving where he was at.
Yeah.
And
That's so
so
good.
as you were talking, that reminded me of David. And you don't know when that suddenly is going to happen, as they call them. We were like, there's no such thing as suddenlies, really, because there's always a God process right before the suddenly.
Yeah,
um but
that's
it's
so
it's in the
good.
midst of serving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that sometimes the most, and I posted this a few days ago, that sometimes the most valuable things are hidden. And so
Mhm.
it's important for us to be okay in that hidden place, because it
Yes.
may be revealing, oh, we do have something valuable. So
Mhm.
just in the hidden places, you can kind of do the trial and error. Oh, I
Yes.
didn't like how I sang that. Let's
Yeah.
rework that. Or even me personally, I don't do the best with building what is it, opening, like call to worship moments or just talking points. And so in the hidden places, I can work on that.
Yes.
And so yeah,
I love that. Yeah. One of our spiritual mamas, Debbie, she'll say, while it's small, why don't you
Mhm.
yes,
learn? Like, while you're in this
Yeah.
safe environment and, where people that love you and care about you are surrounding you, like, why don't we, it's okay if you make a mistake, like we can help correct that. So that way, like you're not doing the same, repeating the same things,
Mhm.
as things get bigger, as God uses you in
that's so
different
good.
ways or venues. Yeah. So
Wow.
that's what that reminds me of. But I do want
Yeah.
to ask. We don't always have like a lot of fellow worship leaders on here,
Yes.
so I love getting to do this. So I've been like all smiles this whole time. But I want to hear just as far as like worship leading, what and just even writing songs and producing and all the stuff that you do, like what is your process with writing songs and just, you know, and worshiping? Like what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So as far as writing, I am best with a team. I'm more of a melody track person as it relates to writing. And I can contribute content to songs, but it's best for me to be with someone who's amazing at lyrics, and I can just throw the spaghetti on the wall and they kind of make sense of it.
That's cool.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and so for me, it's always been team writing. Touch of Your Presence, that song that we did a couple years ago, that was a team write, three people in a room, and honestly, that song came together so quick. But then there are other songs where you may have a lot of writers on it, and that's particularly nice with worship teams, because that can be a way to build community in the worship
Mhm.
teams, but also to connect with your house, the church that you're serving, especially if your pastor's speaking on a particular series or whatever.
Mhm.
You may be able to write something. And I've learned that if I'm listening, God is always dropping, you know,
Mm.
So true.
moments where you can tap into writing
Mhm.
about that. Maybe it's for just you, maybe it's for the team, and maybe it is for the church. You just never know.
Yeah. I like what you said is God's always dropping inspiration if
He
we're
is.
listening. And when I was 16, because I've always loved songwriting, I didn't know that I would be writing worship music or things like that at that
Yeah.
point. But I downloaded on my Kindle like the Songwriting for Dummies book because I just love the concept.
Yes.
But like
I love it.
one of the things, like really the only thing I remember out of that book was finding inspiration everywhere. And the author talked about, you know, I've gotten inspiration from a billboard, and I've gotten inspiration from overhearing a conversation at a cafe,
Yeah.
and just different things like that. And I've learned to hear God that way. God's speaking to us in everyday life, and he wants to, like you said, drop that inspiration.
Mm.
And but it's just, are we
Yeah.
tuning our ears to listen? Are we um, wanting to hear what he has to say, or are we so tunnel vision of what's in front of us that we're not
Yeah.
seeing the bigger picture? But it's there, and I thought
Yeah.
that was really cool because it's how I get things a lot. It's just like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
But oh,
Something new I've been trying to work on is listening
mm,
daily, and I'm not the best at it, but I try to implement that. Just moments where you can just sit and just listen, maybe read
mhm.
a scripture, and then just listen and see if God is speaking anything. Though that I feel like that helps cultivate moments of listening, so that when you're in a
Mm,
writer's room or whatever, your ears are already listening for him to speak.
that's
Yeah,
good.
tuned in.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That's really good. Because that's one thing I'm learning more and more is like hearing the voice of God, like anything creative, like if we want to get better at it, it's going to take practice. And I think sometimes we see people that are like so extremely gifted as a musician or as someone that like hears from God or a speaker or like whatever,
yeah,
and we just think that they naturally just had that in them, which of course there is like natural ability and stuff, you know, but
yeah.
there's also a lot of practice that goes into that.
Sacrifice and
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I love how you just said, like, I just practice listening, just
mm,
being quiet and listening, because I think that's like a really key point that we all need to implement. But I
Yeah,
did want to, it was something interesting you said about with the worship team and writing songs together, and maybe it's based off of like what the pastor talked about, the series that he's in.
yeah,
I just kind of, what is your take on, like, do you see God with the church? A lot of times I feel like Christians, in the United States see it as like, all right, it's worship time for 30 minutes. And then, the pastor preaches for 30 or 45 minutes and it's announcements. And it's like all this like divided, broken up stuff.
yeah,
But like, what do you see in the church as a worship leader of how like all of that can be connected? I don't know if that makes
yeah.
sense, but
No.
do you see God using it in a way where like worship should should lead into like what the pastor's talking about. Like they all like kind of intermingle and intertwine, but
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like a clear enough question for you,
No,
but
I think so. I mean, honestly, I'm a huge fan of transitions, and part of that is me getting connected with my pastor. Hey, what is God speaking to you early in the week? If he's not hearing anything, that's fine. We'll build our set list and move forward. But as much as possible, I love for things to, be pretty blended. So I do feel like it creates just a flow from worship into the word, and even the response time afterwards. And a lot of times, different worship teams that I'm working with, they will they kind of get to the point where they read me and know that there may be something changing after his sermon, just depending on what happened during the message. But I'm always trying to listen and, okay, God's flowing in this direction. All right, guys, we may need to move, in a different way. Last week we were in Toledo, Ohio, and they don't know me at all. And we were there to lead worship and sermon. He preached his sermon, and at the end of it, we went into a hymn, and I was just like, okay, I'm feeling this, and I try to, I don't want to derail everything, so I'm trying not to leave everyone hanging, but it is a part of my heart to, like I said, for things to be blended and transitional, and continuing that, if there was a word that was spoken, just continuing that through music, just to help with
drive
it.
it home. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I like hearing your process, because, and really the picture I get is kind of, it's, you're orchestrating the soundtrack for people to encounter God. Really, you're
That's it.
orchestrating from start to finish. You're orchestrating that soundtrack, that and just letting it flow, and letting really the message go from the head to the heart, or from hearing to really receiving.
Yeah.
And I think as worship leaders, that's really important, because I think we've all been in services where someone isn't in tune, or someone isn't really paying attention, and the Holy Spirit's moving in it, and it's a receiving time or something, and then the song totally doesn't match, and it's like they're playing an exit song, and people are still tarrying at the altar,
Yeah.
And so I know, we've all experienced that, but that's truly a gifting, to be in that role, and to sense what Holy Spirit's doing, and to not work against, but to just go ride that wave, and take people on that journey. And I'm so glad, we serve a God that allows us to work alongside, and see lives change, through our giftings. And I loved hearing that process.
Yeah. I would almost rather not play a song and just do soft music after a sermon, rather than to do the opposite, the total opposite of, what the sermon just, portrayed. So
right. No, I love that, because I think sometimes we just go like, we can get a mindset of like it's a job, or like this was what was on the itinerary or the schedule or the set list or whatever, and so it's like we got to get through it, and it's like no we don't.
Yeah.
Like we can totally
you can throw that
this
set list out the window.
Yes.
Like, rip it to shreds.
Yes.
Because like it's always so much more impactful like when we just follow Holy Spirit versus our plans. And so that's what I want to like I just want to encourage all of our listeners, and especially if you're a worship leader or a pastor, just be willing to follow Holy Spirit's leading and his itinerary or his set list, because that's what's going to make the greatest impact. Because literally one moment in his presence can change everything. Versus, us spending an hour giving our rhetoric or singing our songs, And so I just want to encourage, like, don't be afraid to have that kind of service. Because that's like, those are the life-changing services. Those are the ones you walk away from saying like, I'm never going to be the same. And I love it.
And so
that's so good.
one thing that being able to have that freedom with your band, the group of worshipers that you have, your team, um,
Yeah.
it kind of takes that family bond of knowing each other and worshiping together, maybe not necessarily even on the stage during a service, but like kind of walk us through a little bit of cultivating that team, that worship team, that family, that they're willing to go with you into the unknown
Yeah.
sometimes and stray a little off track of what maybe you guys rehearse. But what does
Yeah.
that look like?
Well, I think it starts before we pick up our instruments. I personally feel like it starts with us just hanging out, getting to know each other. Moments like this where you're just talking and sharing. Um, Pre-COVID, it was easier. You could, have team nights and maybe some people still are, but having team nights and being able to just break bread together and just hang out and chat. And then, so that's one thing that we would do quite a bit. But then also we would have prayer nights where we would just turn on some music and just pray in the room. If anyone had something, they could come up to the mic and share, or if someone needed prayer for something specific. And we would forego rehearsal that week in place of that, just to be able to pray together. And then the other one is pretty much every rehearsal. I know that like there are nuts and bolts to rehearsal. You have to make sure that, you're aware of how the roadmap is for each song, at least a rough roadmap, or maybe you're using tracks and stems.
Yeah.
It's helpful to know all of that and get that going. But then at the end of the rehearsal, I always like to end with about a 10-minute moment where we just flow. We just, maybe we feel really comfortable with one of the songs. And so we'll just worship together on that song. And it's just, I don't know, I just don't like to leave rehearsal without us, being experiencing the presence of God together. And so that just creates a moment where you're weekly worshiping together, and it's not Sunday. You're not, in front of everyone, but it's the team's hidden place, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's good. It's about creating that culture.
Yeah.
I know, because you just go into, because we, with our music ministry, we go into different churches. And so we see different, cultures of how everybody does things. And, of course, it's going to be different wherever you go. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But some places you go, it's just like, well, we have to do it this way. We have to do it according to how it's written, or like places aren't really comfortable with just free flowing. And so I love how, because I've often wondered, like, how do you create that? Because I know, like, with just Alicia and I, if it's just me on guitar, her on piano, that's easy. Like,
you do that for forever.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we grew up together,
Yeah.
so we know each other. But as far as like when you introduce other people into it, I've often wondered, like, what would be a good way to get comfortable flowing with each other. And so I love the idea of just taking the end of practice just to do 10 minutes or so of just worship time with each other and free flowing. Like, I love that a lot.
Yeah, because the practice part's good, like you said, knowing the structure and the roadmap of where you guys are going, but also leaving that for a little off-roading and saying, well, what if we just listen? What if we just sit and linger?
Yeah.
What is is a song of the Lord coming forth? Like
Wow.
giving that space where you're not in front of people. Like Whitney talked about, while things are small, while we're in our family group here, let's step out. You have permission to step out and try, and
that's so good.
Creating space for that. I just, that's awesome. Because I was the same with Whitney, is just like, how do we create that family, that worship culture where there's that safety, or where there's that space where people can learn to prophesy on their instruments and sing prophetic songs of the Lord, and so that's so cool. We could talk to you for hours. We're like kindred spirits. Like,
yes, absolutely. I'm now wondering, when are we going to get the opportunity to worship together?
Exactly.
Oh my, that's gonna be a blowout service.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Even if it's just like a small group
in a living room, just
us.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
I know. We
Yes.
make it over to Nashville usually at least once a year or so.
Yeah.
And we go to Atlanta to
great.
record. So we'll just have to like
Yeah.
go the Nashville way from now on.
Absolutely.
We'll make
Sean
it
Hill,
work.
right?
Yes.
I love Sean Hill. He is
Oh my
amazing.
gosh.
He
He
is.
Such a dear friend.
Yeah, he's sweet and he's funny and he's crazy.
And
like
He
good
is.
he's good at what he does.
Yes.
He's
He
an awesome
is.
producer. So
Yeah.
So just to kind of wrap things up, you said that you're working on something in the studio.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
It's a bit of a blast from the past. We're fully immersing into the roots, so to
Cool.
speak. And so it's 4 songs, and all of them are pretty gospel heavy, but still keeping that engaging theme. But for sure, one of the songs is from a writer's retreat that I was in with Sean Hill. And so the song's not with him, but it was from that retreat.
Yeah.
So we've just been having a blast working on it. It should be done in a couple weeks, and then
oh
we'll
wow.
start the process of getting it out. But I'm super excited about it.
Awesome.
I am too.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
By the time this episode airs, then it'll already be out.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
tell us, and our listeners, how we can get in touch with you and your music and just follow what you're doing, where you're going.
Yeah, so Rawls Music on Instagram, just at Rawls Music, or my website is rawlsmusic.com, and I'm also on Facebook, Ron Rawls. So yeah,
Awesome. Well,
RAWLS. Sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
I bet a lot of people get that wrong. Well, thank you so much for taking the
Yes.
time to do this. And
Oh man,
we
thank you
just-
guys.
yeah, we just loved hearing your heart. And I just feel like what God was showing me, at least, like praying at the beginning, like just completely came out during the
Yeah.
during the interview. Just your heart and your yes to him, and just you're helping people. You're not just entertaining, you're helping people enter in.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. That's like what we want to do with our music ministry as well. So like Alicia said, definitely kindred spirits.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to our next Nashville trip.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me know. Seriously, I can't wait.
Yes.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ron, on Coming Up Higher. And we know this is probably just the first of an awesome friendship, and already feel like you're a brother. And so just want to thank you so much for sharing your heart, and just really, like Whitney said, for your yes throughout the years to get you to this point, because it's a beautiful picture of what God can do with a surrendered heart. But thank you guys for tuning in to Coming Up Higher. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and rate it and share with your friends. Every little bit helps. Have a great day.
God bless.